Hi, I'm Tim Stein and welcome to this video on the basics of scales and arpeggios in our ongoing series of videos on the basics of piano playing. Why are scales and arpeggios important? Well, music is littered with scales and arpeggios, and apart from developing your basic technique, knowing your scales will help with everything from learning your keys to knowing your way around the keyboard. What I referred to previously as the geography of the keyboard. When you're learning your scales, and hopefully if you have a teacher, they should be able to help point you in the right direction, that your majority of your basic scales have a fairly standard fingering. And I would always start out playing scales in what I call finger groups before playing them one note after the other. So for example, if I take a very simple C major scale, 1 octave, we start with a group of 3, and then we have a group of 4, and then back again to 3, and up again to 4. And similarly, in the left hand going down, you have the same fingering configuration. Group of 3, group of 4, 5th finger is not toned, and then a group of 4, and then a group of 3. So it really doesn't matter what scale you play. As I say, the majority of your scales will have finger groups of 3s and 4s. So that's the first thing that I would do. And then once you know your finger groups really well, you can then start to play them one note at a time. And I would always get students to practice them 1 octave first, 2 octaves, and so on. You can do that slowly, and then you can start to speed that up, and eventually you'll see groups of notes together, so you won't just see individual notes, and you'll see shapes. And when you look at your pieces of music, again, you won't see single notes. You should end up seeing patterns, notes together, and it's a really good way, an economical way of learning pieces from the beginning. When it comes to scale playing, people often find that the major difficulty is turning the thumb under the hand. Now, what you really don't want to do is to push the thumb under the hand, because then you create tension. So the best way of practicing your scales is to practice that thumb movement. And a little exercise I give students is basically just practicing 3 notes. Where you're just practicing the turn of the thumb under, and you just want to be careful that your wrist is as relaxed as possible, your fingers are firm, and you're not forcing the thumb underneath. And then you do exactly the same thing in the left hand. You can start either on middle C, or an octave lower. And I sometimes like people to start slightly left or right of center, so that you're not constricted to the middle of the piano. You've got more freedom of movement. And when we come to arpeggios, for example, often the major difficulty is the stretch. And people always think that they have to try and accommodate as many notes as possible in one hand position, which is often one of the main reasons that they find it very difficult to play. So I would always suggest that if you're playing an arpeggio, you take 1 note at a time. So for example, if I take a very simple arpeggio of C major, I'm trying only to think of the note that I'm playing and not the note that comes, say, the 2nd or 3rd note after. So I'm not overstretching. And a very useful exercise for practicing your arpeggios is to hold the 2 middle notes down together. So what you do is this. Now, some people might find that difficult because they will feel a stretch between the 2nd and 3rd finger. So what I would do is, as you play the 2nd finger, and as the 3rd finger is about to play its note, you let go of the 2nd finger. And then similarly And then you can do exactly the same thing in the left hand. And then once you can do that comfortably, you can then practice the arpeggio normally. And arpeggios are all about judging distances. And another useful tip is that when you're playing your arpeggios, you can use your arm to help move the hand across the keys. Because often you find people are trying to play arpeggios and their elbows are either locked to the sides of their body, in which case they're completely restricted in terms of movement. For example, if I try to play an arpeggio where my arms are glued to my body, I can hardly move at all. Similarly, I see people who play as if they've got chicken wings. And again, your arms, if your arms are sticking out, it's impossible to play because you're too far away from the keys. I hope that helps. If you practice your scales and arpeggios very slowly, experiment with the little tips that I've given you to play them better. Hopefully, when it comes to playing your scales and your arpeggios in your pieces, they should feel a lot better, much more comfortable. But always remember to do these things very slowly with firm fingers and flexible wrists, building up speed bit by bit. I hope you find these tips useful and that you can tune into my next video when I talk about the basics of piano tone.